Venezuela looks today like a very different country than it was just a few months ago. With economic, financial, and political transformation underway, is this the dawn of a new era? And here's a little tease. Could Cuba be next? We're going to find out all of that and a lot more right now on UBS Trending. Hi, everyone, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm Anthony Pastore. Always a pleasure to be with you for today and always. Alejo Czerwonko is back in the studio with me. Of course, he is the CIO for Emerging Markets Americas here at UBS and always comes with me once a month to talk about what's going on in the emerging market space. Today happens to be Venezuela as the topic country. Anyway, Alejo, good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So obviously, it's still early days. You know, we know about what happened in Venezuela when Nicolas Maduro and his regime were taken out by military force by the United States. Since then, and it's only a few months later, so obviously sometimes these things take years to unwind and get back to whatever normal might look like for the country of Venezuela. But what does it look like today as you look at what's happening there compared to what it was in January?
First off, Anthony, let me just say that we live in a world in which reality is a lot more interesting than fiction. Mm-hmm. What do we need Netflix for if on January 3rd, we've got a military operation that surgically removes Nicolas Maduro from Caracas, flies him out to Brooklyn, New York to face prosecution, and we got a new president in place in Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez. The question is, have things changed? And I think the answer is yes, it depends on what area you're looking at. Right. If you focus on the economic picture, we are indeed moving away from, very state-led, hyper-controlled to more open, private participation in the economy, specifically the oil and gas sector, which is the most important one for Venezuela. There's a new hydrocarbon law. Private participation in the sector is now more encouraged. Foreign investment in the sector is now more encouraged. So things are changing fast. Mm-hmm. In addition, when it comes to politics, we don't yet have a democracy. There haven't been new elections. That will take time. But the pressure on the opposition is easing. There's a bit more political debate. And the hope is over time, Venezuela will move towards a new political system.
Right. And the hope, of course, is on the world stage. And I'm sure for the Venezuelan people is that reform sticks around and then changes the nature of how the government is run, et cetera, get more democratic votes in place, et cetera. Like you said, it does take a long time to unwind years of socialism and oppression that had plagued that country for so long.
Actually, Anthony, we're talking about 27 years of Chavismo, Madurism, populism, right? A very poor form of government for the Venezuelan people.
Right.
1999, Chavez came into power. Venezuela used to be a country in the 70s, A-rated by credit rating agencies, a thriving economy, right? Over time, first gradually, then suddenly, we had a worsening of the economic situation that eventually ended up in hyperinflation, economic contraction, exodus of millions of people, and a default of Venezuelan sovereign debt.
Right. And the truth is their sovereign debt has now been in default, like you said, for it's almost a decade or so, right? 9 years or so. But the country has kicked off a process to restructure some of that debt. How does that work?
Very recent, Anthony. We're talking about news from a week ago. After 9 years of sovereign debt in Venezuela being in default, that is, if you're a bondholder, you're not getting paid. 9 years of getting zero. Now we're opening the door for a debt exchange. Turn in old debt, get new debt. There's going to be a haircut involved. There's going to be a lot of negotiation involved between the country and its creditors. What I can tell you, Anthony, is it's excellent news that we're kicking this off, but you should be aware that we're probably facing the most complicated sovereign debt restructuring in history. Wow. Why? We have so many different creditors. Private sector creditors like bondholders from Wall Street, quote unquote, to China and Russia. And we have so many different incentives and trade-offs and interests in this group of creditors that getting them to agree on anything is going to be difficult. You should measure the resolution to this debt saga in not months, but maybe quarters or maybe even potentially years.
Right, and the risks in place, obviously there's political reversals that could cause more of a risk scenario. Like you said, legal hurdles, credit coordination, a lot has to go right for this to work well.
Yes,
right.
To resolve such complicated situation, it will take hard work, consistency, negotiation. I just want to manage expectations that Venezuela is not going to be able to restructure its debt by mid-year.
Right. I mean, obviously, it's years and years that they have to kind of go back and go to those creditors who have been holding on to this debt for such a long time. I do want to act because, it seems like 2026 is the story of oil, between what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz or what's not happening. A lot of times we're sort of still stuck in this resolution period of will they, won't they? And obviously this Venezuela story, as you said, they're the largest known oil reserves for any one country. So there's a lot of oil that's sitting there. The U.S. intervention comes at a time of sort of deepening interest in Latin America overall. Do you think that will continue?
Yes, I think so. For starters, Latin America is getting more interest, resources from the U.S. than at any point in the last 25 plus years. Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State, first international trip of this administration to Latin America. Over the last 18 months, the Trump administration has gone involved directly in Panamanian affairs, Brazilian affairs, Argentine, Salvadorian, and of course, Venezuelan affairs. They even made it explicit in national security documents. We now have the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. It stipulates that Latin America is of strategic importance. I had the opportunity to be in Washington, D.C. just a couple weeks ago. I came across Jake Sullivan, that used to be the national security advisor under Biden. And I asked him, if you ever come to power again, will you keep this doctrine or will you toss it? And he goes, we keep it because we're interested in controlled migration. We're interested in supply chains that are more secure. So I think it goes beyond the Trump administration, and the interest and focus on Latin America will likely persist.
Right. Wow. It's fascinating. Amazing that you were able to grab a conversation with him as well to get his perspective, because it is obviously somebody who has already sat in a seat of political power. To get his opinion, very valuable.
Yeah, I wanted to get a sense of what both sides of the aisle were thinking about.
Right, exactly. Now, what about, now I teased in the beginning that could Cuba be next, but that doesn't come out of thin air. There's been sort of some recent developments on the island of Cuba. What do we know, and why is it that we potentially think that it could be the next Venezuela-like scenario?
Information is limited, Anthony,
Right.
But I think by now there's been enough reported by the media in terms of a tightening embargo on the island, additional steps taken by the U.S. administration to put pressure on the existing Cuban administration. Just a couple of days ago, we saw Raúl Castro, one of the longtime leaders of Cuba, being prosecuted in the U.S. for a number of charges. And when I was in D.C. again, many people were talking about might Cuba be next. It seems to be a priority of the current U.S. administration, and the growing pressure on the island seems to suggest that regime change probability is likely at its highest likelihood in decades, right? So developing story, but I wouldn't be surprised if something happened there. Let me say, Anthony, we do have a publication, Cuba the Day After Tomorrow, trying to think, what might the Cuban economy look like if we do see a political regime change.
And what do you think, what lessons do you think Cuba can take from Venezuela as they're maybe at the precipice of some big changes that are going to be potentially happening there?
Well, I think the U.S. is very clear in terms of pointing to the Venezuela example in terms of do's and don'ts. Cooperate, and you can be a partner as Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela seems to be, building herself.
Yeah.
Do not cooperate, and you'll end up in Brooklyn, New York, right? So I think that's the reality.
That sounds about right. Alejo, thank you very much. Really, it's a lot to consider. As we said, it only happened from January, and we're sitting here in May, and so many developments in such a short time, but a lot more that could potentially happen over the next few months and years. So good to get the first take from you on where we are today.
We're living through history.
Every day. It's amazing. Every day it's crazy. Our kids are going to ask us questions about, remember when you lived through all these? We're like, which one? There's 75. Exactly. Alejo, thank you. Great to see you. And thank you all for joining us. Lots more information from Alejo and the Chief Investment Office on our Insights website at ubs.com/views. Plus, you can take a look at all of the content that UBS is posting on various social media platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook. Plus, UBS Studios has its own dedicated Instagram channel. Follow us at UBS Trending for content that you're not going to find anywhere else. And as always, if you have any questions about what Alejo and I spoke about today or how it might impact your portfolio, make sure you're continuing this conversation with your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. We wish you a great rest of your day. And remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. We'll see you soon, everybody. Thanks.